What is the boogeyman? Is the evil ever really gone? Are babysitters having too much sex on the job? Welcome back to the Witching Hour, the horror corner of the new Rockstars network. I'm Erik Voss, and let's talk about John Carpenter's 1978 horror masterpiece, Halloween, why it's considered the primordial slasher film, and why Michael Myers feels like slashing so much. This is a film I've rewatched every October, ever since my parents stopped paying attention to what I was watching on TV. In fact, watching too many horror movies as a kid is probably why I decided to do every Witching Hour video looking like this, even though my co-hosts Jessica and Gina smartly avoided this Katie Heron rookie mistake.
Why are you dressed so scary?
Like I can't express myself with my hands or breathe correctly, and hugging myself is really bringing a level of unhinged tension to my video essays that I'm not entirely in control of. But I'm bringing all this up to say, this year, for the first time, I think I finally went cuckoo enough to understand the psychology of Michael Myers. Why he kills, why he appears in the background at the exact times that he does. And in a film that came out in 1978, what a killer like him represented to audiences then, and what he represents to audiences nearly 5 decades later. Hint for the end of this video, it's the same sick thing. Let's start with a recap of the film. On Halloween night in 1963, in the fictional town of Haddonfield, Illinois, a teenage girl named Judith Myers, after hooking up with her boyfriend, is stabbed to death by a killer we only see from their point of view until we realize, surprise, it's her 6-year-old little brother, Michael. 15 years later, Michael escapes from his mental institution, and Dr. Loomis, well aware of the evil that Michael represents, is on the hunt. Michael returns to his abandoned home in Haddonfield, where he sets his sights on Laurie Strode, who made the unfortunate mistake of listening to her father when he told her to leave the key to the Myers house under the mat for some prospective buyers because he plans to sell the house. Nice going, Laurie.
Just calm down. It's ridiculous.
From there, Michael stalks Laurie and the boys she'll be babysitting that night, Tommy Doyle, around town, and various creepy sightings. Some, like Laurie spotting him by the clothesline outside, happen so fast that Michael seems to possess a supernatural ability to appear and disappear like a ghost. Michael wears mechanic coveralls and a mask that costumers made by painting white a 1975 Captain Kirk mask and making the eye holes bigger than William Shatner could ever open them, and brushing back the hair. Dr. Loomis investigates the town and finds the headstone of Judith Myers missing and assumes Michael will return to the Myers house.
He came home.
On Halloween night, while Laurie babysits Tommy, her friend Annie babysits Lindsay Wallace across the street. The girls plan to bring the kids to one house so that they can hook up with their boyfriends, but outside the Wallace house, Michael kills the family dog and then kills Annie after hiding in the car. While Laurie waits with the 2 kids back at the Doyle house for Annie to get back, their other friend Linda and her boyfriend Bob get to the Wallace house and hook up. Michael kills Bob downstairs by pinning the kid to the wall with a knife. Michael then poses as a ghost to Linda, but then strangles her as she tries to call Laurie. Laurie goes over to the Wallace house where she finds the bodies of her friends, starting with Annie, posed in front of the Judith Myers headstone. Michael tries to kill Laurie, but she flees back to the Doyle house. Laurie fights back, but Michael never seems to die. Dr. Loomis arrives and shoots Michael out the upstairs window, but when he looks over the balcony, Michael's body is gone. We in the film hearing Michael's breathing over the various shots of Haddonfield, not sure where he went next, until we get to Halloween 2, and you kind of figure out where he goes there. John Carpenter's Halloween is a film in which every component is seen as iconic and deeply influential to all slasher films that followed. There was the casting of Jamie Lee Curtis in her first ever film role, the daughter of Hollywood royalty Tony Curtis, and Janet Leigh, yes, the Janet Leigh, scream queen of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, making this movie's star someone destined to play this role. And since I referenced Psycho with Osgood Perkins in my previous video essay on this channel, Osgood, who actually might have been named after a movie that Tony Perkins was most famous for, Some Like It Hot, now that I think about it, I do feel obligated at this point to point out an incidental Easter egg that not enough people talk about with this movie. In the opening titles, the shot of the jack-o'-lantern, look closely and you will see a fly crawling around that crooked smile, which I choose to see as the horror film gods calling back the final line of Psycho.
And they'll say, why, she wouldn't even harm a fly.
There's the staple elements cited in films like Scream, the final female archetype, the suburban setting, the rules like teenagers who have sex get killed, or never say, I'll be right back.
I'll be right back.
or even the meta aspect of characters in the movie watching a classic horror film. In Scream, they watch this movie, Halloween, and in this movie, Halloween, they watch Howard Hawks' 1951 The Thing, which John Carpenter would ironically remake 4 years after this as yet another horror masterpiece. But we should also just talk about Carpenter's incredible work in this film. He shot this movie in South Pasadena on a $300,000 budget and grossed $70 million with it, making it one of the hugest returns on investment in any movie ever. He composed the film's haunting score himself, and he crafted every scene with incredible suspense. From the early minutes of the film, you get the sense that Michael Myers is always watching from the suburban streets of Haddonfield, somewhere in the background, plaguing these safe streets, even in broad daylight. From the beginning, we hear Michael Myers breathing inside the Myers house when Laurie drops off the key. Then Michael steps into the foreground as Laurie walks away humming. Then Michael appears outside Laurie's school, watching her through the window, and then suddenly disappears after she answers a question about fate. And also, you may know that this shot came back later in movies like It Follows and Hereditary. Then Michael suddenly grabs the kid Lonnie after Lonnie bullies Tommy and breaks his pumpkin. Following that, Michael follows Tommy home from school for a block or so. Then Michael drives past Laurie and her friends in Dr. Loomis's stolen station wagon and gets mad when Annie yells, "Speed kills," probably triggered by the word kills. Then Michael stands behind the hedges as the girls approach in the famous shot, and then disappears when Annie rounds the hedge to look. Then Michael stares up at Laurie's bedroom from the clothesline in the yard outside and then disappears. Michael's station wagon can be seen driving behind Laurie and Annie. Then Annie and Laurie pull up to the broken-in hardware store, and after they pull away, when Dr. Loomis arrives, Michael turns into the main road, passing right behind Dr. Loomis. And I love this shot because Carpenter must have timed it perfectly with a very natural long take with lots of other traffic driving through the street. Michael continues to drive behind Annie's car at dusk and then parks in their neighborhood, and then things really get cooking. Tommy looks out his window and sees Michael crossing the street thinking it's the boogeyman, and he's right. Then Michael is outside the kitchen watching Annie strip when she spills butter on her clothes, and then he knocks over the hanging plant. Then we see Michael outside another window and he kills the family dog. Then Michael appears outside the laundry room while Annie washes her clothes, and at this point Michael locks her in. Then Annie leaves the door to the kitchen open and Michael suddenly appears in the background of that shot, and then when the camera pans back in the same shot, he's gone again. Then Annie and Lindsay cross the street to the Doyle house and Michael stands up behind the parked car. Then Annie finds the door to the car locked, then goes back to the keys, and I love this detail that when she comes back, she doesn't even think that, hey, why is the car door now open if I didn't have the keys yet to open it? She figures this out too late because when she sits down, she finds the windows all fogged up and Michael pops up in the backseat, strangles her, and cuts her throat. Then Tommy sees Michael carrying Annie's body back inside of Lindsay's house. Boogeyman confirmed. Linda and Bob make out in Lindsay's house and Michael watches them. And then while upstairs, Linda and Bob have sex with a jack-o'-lantern on a nightstand. Nice. Michael's shadow passes on the wall beside them. And then when Bob goes down for the beer downstairs, Michael rushes out of the closet, chokes Bob, and pins him against the wall with the knife. Then Michael, wearing the bedsheet as a ghost costume with Bob's glasses, stands in the doorway and stares at Linda. Then Michael strangles Linda with the telephone cord. And then after Laurie finds the bodies, Michael's mask looms into view from the shadows behind her, and then he slashes her sleeve. Then Michael tussles with Laurie and chases her back to the Doyle house. Laurie locks the door and then finds the window open. And then Michael pops out from behind the sofa and Laurie stabs him in the neck with a knitting needle. Michael now appears at the top of the stairs behind Laurie, and Laurie tries to hide from Michael and smartly opens the balcony door, a fortuitous move for her as it sets up why the balcony doors are left open when Dr. Loomis shoots him through that opening. And then after Laurie thinks she got in a fatal stab on Michael, he sits up again in the background. But now Dr. Loomis has arrived with his gun and shoots Michael repeatedly off the balcony. But in the final shot, wow, Michael's body has vanished. So in all of those appearances, all of those jump scares, the scariest of them was the final one where Michael doesn't appear in the frame. And throughout all these, you see this ingenious construction by John Carpenter to really deliver the maximum amount of suspense. But making us even more paranoid is a sighting that I don't even think most observers clocked. Minutes before Laurie even gets to the Myers house, when she's walking away from her father. Whoa! There's a station wagon in the distant background. Now it's hard to tell if that's Loomis's station wagon driven by Michael or just any of the many station wagons that would be in a suburb in 1978. Either way, Carpenter has made us so paranoid that we kind of want this to be Michael this early. So over the years, there has been no shortage of speculation and analysis as to why Michael Myers kills in this movie. Tommy Doyle, who thinks the thing he saw, which the film's script and end credits creepily call the shape, the kid assumes that this is the boogeyman, and even asks Laurie to define the boogeyman as they flip through his comic books, which we see later actually contains Marvel's Howard the Duck number 26 from 1978, featuring Howard asking on the cover, "Have you heard the one about sudden death?"
Laser Man. Neutron Man, I can understand why. Tarantula Man.
Laurie, what's the boogeyman?
While Laurie spends this movie dismissing the boogeyman as just mere superstition, the kind of thing that Tommy's bullies taunted him about, by the end of the film, Laurie, Tommy, and really all of us are left wondering, well shit, shouldn't we call evil this tangible the actual boogeyman?
What is the boogeyman? I'm scared.
There's nothing to be scared of.
Are you sure?
Killed it.
You can't kill the boogeyman.
When you were a kid, you got sick. Your mom found a doctor, and then you saw the doctor. As an adult, the routine is something more like get sick, Google your symptoms, spend 6 hours doom scrolling, convince yourself you've got something uncurable, and then give up on seeing a doctor. But that's no good. Finding a doctor should be easy. With ZocDoc, today's sponsor, it is. ZocDoc makes it easy to find the right doctor for you, fast, so you can stop putting it off and finally cross that appointment off your list. ZocDoc is a free website where you can search and compare high-quality in-network doctors, choose the right one for your needs, and click to instantly book an appointment. From mental health to dentistry, eye care, skincare, and everything in between. ZocDoc makes it easy to book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers. With ZocDoc, you can filter for doctors by insurance, location, and specialties, and see reviews by verified patients so you can choose the best, most convenient care for you. My favorite part is that you can see the doctor's actual appointment openings, choose a time that works for you, and click to instantly book a visit without having to get on the phone. I had something that could have been a flu or could have been nothing, and I was able to find a doctor who helped me out instantly. Turns out it was just a mild sinus infection that I was able to clear up instantly with some antibiotics. No doom scrolling needed. Plus, ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking, and you can even score same-day appointments. No need to call doctor's offices and wait on hold either. ZocDoc lets you do everything online. So stop putting off those doctor's appointments. Go to ZocDoc.com/witchinghour or click the link in the description to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. So what makes Michael Myers the boogeyman? What drives him? There have been some motivations explored in the sequel films. Halloween 2 takes place in the later hours of that same Halloween night, and we learn that Laurie Strode and Michael Myers are in fact siblings, although this backstory was later retconned. Halloween 3, The Season of the Witch, is the one film of the series to not feature Michael as the antagonist, as the producers wanted to try to explore an anthology story taking place elsewhere on Halloween. But then things returned somewhat to formula in Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, which transferred Michael's obsession onto Laurie's daughter Jamie, technically his niece, with whom it's implied that Michael shares a telepathic link. In Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers, and then even more so in its follow-up, Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers, that's the one with Paul Rudd, we get to learn about Michael's backstory as the product of a Celtic cult carrying a curse of thorn. This was the explanation behind Michael's seeming supernatural strength and his apparent immortality, because it's established that hell will not accept him. Meanwhile, there was Rob Zombie's Halloween in 2007 that reimagines Michael Myers' origin story as coming from a broken household, but since pretty much all of these sequels were later retconned, especially in the most recent trilogy of films from 2018 to 2022 by David Gordon Green, that built a new continuity stemming from the events of that first night in Haddonfield on Halloween of 1978. Without the Halloween 2 Michael-Laurie bloodline connection. So the assumption among most fans is that Laurie was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, reminded Michael Myers too much of the sister that he slaughtered in his canon event, and that led to Michael's lifelong obsession with Laurie Strode. Now, film scholars like Carol J. Clover in her 1987 media study, Her Body, Himself, Gender in the Slasher Film, argues that killers in the slasher films like Halloween are fueled by a, quote, psychosexual fury, and that they amount to moral scolding of young women for just making sexually liberated choices. One could argue, after all, that Michael Myers' defining moment moment was seeing his sister have sex when she was supposed to be watching him and killing her for that. And now, as an adult, seeing babysitters of the same age his sister was when he killed her, engaging in similar sexual delights, neglecting the children they're supposed to be looking after, just triggers this code of punishment he now feels obligated to dole out. So, after seeing Annie stripped down to prepare to abandon the child she was responsible for to go have sex, Michael does the same to her, and then even crucifies Annie with the headstone of his sister Judith. However, John Carpenter and his co-writer Deborah Hill have pushed back against these interpretations that Michael Myers is a kind of sexecutioner. Yes, that is my term, and I was kind of proud of it until I realized it just kind of sounds like an executioner who fucks the condemned to death. So instead, let's call this take Michael Myers as the cockblock killer in a suburbia filled with overly horny youth. To this interpretation, John Carpenter has said, quote, "It has been suggested that I was making some kind of moral statement. Believe me, I'm not. In Halloween, I viewed the characters as simply normal teenagers." In another interview, he said, quote, "The one girl who is the most sexually uptight just keeps stabbing this guy with a long knife. She's the most sexually frustrated. She's the one that's killed him. Not because she's a virgin, but because all that sexually repressed energy starts coming out. She uses all those phallic symbols on the guy." And then Deborah Hill said, quote, "There was absolutely no intent for that to be the underlying reason. I was raised a Catholic schoolgirl, and what leaked into the script is my Catholic sensibility. It was totally unintentional." So as we look elsewhere for Michael Myers' motivations, let's look to characters in the movie. Characters like Dr. Loomis and others who echo him throughout the franchise have simplified this as Michael Myers is just pure evil, plain and simple. There's Dr. Loomis's line in this film describing when he first examined Michael when he was a boy.
I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face as I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
There's also the chilling exchange from the original screenplay from a version of the mental institution Escape that did not make it into the final cut of the film. In that version of this scene, Dr. Loomis goes to talk to another escaped patient, and when he comes back to the car to talk to the nurse, he says, "He asked me if I could help him find his purple lawnmower." But then getting serious, he says, "He said something else. It's all right now. He's gone. The evil's gone." Ugh, I loved reading this because it shows how the patients at this institution were all tortured by Michael's mere presence among them. It's kind of like that idea that comes up in Halloween 6, how even hell was like, "Fuck no, this dude's too evil for us." Or even the unhinged screaming that the other patients yelled out in the opening scene of The Yard in the 2018 Halloween. The idea floated by Tommy that you can't kill the boogeyman, you can't kill the evil, came from Deborah Hill's inspirations for the setting of this film on Halloween night. The producer, Irwin Yablans, and financier, Mustafa Akkad, reportedly approached John Carpenter after he had directed Assault on Precinct 13 about the idea of a horror film about a killer who stalked babysitters. And some say originally this film was actually going to be called The Babysitter Murders. In this 2002 interview with The Guardian upon the movie's 25th anniversary, co-writer Deborah Hill explained her interest in the holiday tradition of Halloween for its Celtic origins in Samhain, which refers to the night of the harvest when bonfires were lit and treats were left out and the barrier between the living and the dead was at its thinnest. Hill said, quote, "The idea was that you couldn't kill evil, and that was how we came about the story. We went back to the old idea of Samhain, that Halloween was the night where all the souls are let out to wreak havoc on the living, and then came up with the story about the most evil kid who ever lived. And when John came up with this fable of a town with a dark secret of someone who once lived there, and now that evil has come back, that's what made Halloween work." I honestly think we can trust Deborah Hill the most when it comes to Michael Myers' intent, as the 2003 documentary Halloween: A Cut Above the Rest confirms that it was actually Deborah's hand and arm as young Michael Myers in that opening long take. She was literally the slasher that slashed Judith Myers. So now we're kind of getting somewhere. The traditions of Halloween and this idea that everyone's hometown has a legend of a freak murder that they're always worried will come back someday.
You know, every town is something like this happens.
So once I got to that point in my research, also around this 25th anniversary, I found this 2002 academic media study by Pat Gill called The Monstrous Years: Teens, Slasher Films, and the Family. My kind of academic paper. She wrote, quote, "In films following Halloween, suburban and small town teenagers are put in danger time and time again, at home, at school, at camp, and on holiday. These films seem to mock white flight to gated communities, in particular the attempts of parents to shield their children from the dangerous influences represented by the city. Widespread crime, easy access to drugs, unsupervised friendships. The danger is within, the films seem to say. The horror derives from the family and from the troubling ordeal of being a late 20th century teenager. I love this take. So according to Pat, the real boogeyman is a false sense of security of suburbia, starting in the late 20th century. This whole lie of the American dream that families could ever protect their kids by just fleeing the dangerous and immoral cities and then fortifying their families within cul-de-sacs and neighborhood watch signs. The illusion of suburbia and the dangers beneath that refuse to stay buried is really a recurring theme explored not just in these slasher films that Halloween inspired, but in other 80s classics like Poltergeist, The Goonies, E.T., It, and now our current era of millennial Gen X targeted nostalgia fests like Stranger Things. And the reason film audiences in 1978 found this to be so terrifying was a very real fear in America during that time. The mind of a serial killer, due in large part to the way violent crimes were starting to be linked and reported by both law enforcement and the media. The concept of a serial killer, defined as an individual who murders 3 or more people, was starting to enter the public consciousness in the late 1970s and early 80s in a big way. The decade leading up to this, the Zodiac Killer frightened many California Bay Area communities due to the release of his letters and cryptograms in newspapers like the San Francisco Chronicle. The Manson family cult was connected to a number of high-profile murders and attacks. The summer of 1976 was even called the Summer of Sam, after David Berkowitz went on a violent spree due to what he said were devilish voices from his neighbor's dog. In Los Angeles from 1977 to 1978, the Hillside Strangler terrorized the city. From 1972 to 1978 in Chicago, John Wayne Gacy murdered at least 33 young men. From 1974 to 1978 across various western states, Ted Bundy killed dozens of young women and girls. And while the dots were finally connected in recent years, Joseph James D'Angelo, who went by many media monikers and later dubbed the Golden State Killer, killed and attacked dozens in California in the 70s and 80s. Infamous killers like these led to the behavioral sciences division at the FBI that broke into the public discourse when, in 1981, the New York Times first used the term serial killer to describe the Atlanta child killer Wayne Williams. The victims of all of these crimes that I've mentioned were not protected by things like suburbia, and all of these tragedies led to a natural curiosity in this country as to how these things could penetrate our neighborhoods and what kind of mind could or would ever do this. All of this was on the minds of American artists and audiences in the late 70s and early 80s, and as much as the producers of this film don't want to admit that they didn't set out to make a horror film that would target old Don and Stacy of the Babysitters Club, that is clearly how society received 1978's Halloween and the entire slasher subgenre that it kicked off. Laurie Strode is not targeted as a result of any gross incompetence by the girl, any disregard of tradition or history or societal virtues, any original sin that she inherited from her family or from the community. She's not a temptress archetype. She doesn't wander off the beaten path like the kids in Evil Dead or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There's no traumatic death in her life that she struggles to mourn like the heroines of Ari Aster films. She's not the victim of clear gaslighting mechanisms that we see in movies like Rosemary's Baby and Alien. All Laurie Strode did was exist in a suburb in 1978. She did a typical suburban chore, and then she walked away humming this song with an earshot of just the wrong guy.
I wish I had you all alone, just the two of us.
Just as I was fascinated by Sigourney Weaver improvising "You Are My Lucky Star" from Singing in the Rain at the critical moment of Alien, I'm also obsessed with this moment because it's not a real song. Jamie Lee Curtis made it up. At a 2014 Beyond Fest Q&A with John Carpenter, Jamie Lee Curtis recalled this first day of shooting. She told Carpenter, quote, "At the end you said, now walk away and finish out the scene singing. And I remember saying to you like, what's the tune of the little song? And you said, I don't know, make it up. Now you have to understand, I don't sing at all. I just don't sing. And I remember it like, what do I sing? So I sang, I wish I had you all alone. Horrible! But it ended up being the perfect choice by Jamie Lee Curtis for the character of Laurie Strode because this little improvisation became an innocent mistake where Michael Myers imprints on Laurie Strode after thinking this girl who reminds him of his sister made up this little love song just for him. That's why she's the final female, because in his mind he's saying, I'm gonna deliver on that promise of just the two of us. She's gonna have me all alone. So Halloween as a film is really saying, in suburban America, just something that sweet can make you a target. So that later that evening, you're gonna find yourself pounding on your neighbor's doors begging for help, but they're gonna dismiss you as just a Halloween prank, the girl who cried boogeyman. So what drives the boogeyman in this movie to do his slashing? Well, it's the same thing that has always driven every boogeyman throughout the ages. What Laurie Strode would even say in her classroom in this movie. Fate, a menace that exists in all hometowns to stress test our mindset of security. The safer we feel in our cul-de-sacs, the more violently shattering those stress tests will feel when they inevitably find us in our homes. So really, that's my 2025 contribution to why Halloween was such a landmark hit in America in 1978, and why the seminal slasher film remains iconic today. It's American suburbia's hysteria over serial killers, and our perennial need to build out our nests with these various cozy protections from outside worlds that will always find their way in, which I assume many of you manifested in the past month by streaming movies like Halloween, or Netflix serial killer miniseries, or horror YouTube channels from those cozy couches that Laurie Strode thought protected her when she was watching scary stuff. I'm just saying, you may want to grab that knitting needle as you look behind your couch right now. What's your hot take on John Carpenter's Halloween? Subscribe to the Witching Hour channel and to all the channels in the New Rockstars network. Thanks for watching, and the evil is gone!